Hello, everybody. My name is Richard Wojciechowski, BC ABA, and I'm going to be going over my oral defense for my thesis for spring 2018 of advancing the technology of health discounting. So, introduction. Before we can start to understand discounting, we need to understand impulsivity. The simplest behavioral definition of impulsivity is the increased likelihood of an organism choosing smaller, more immediate reinforcers over larger reinforcers obtained at a delay. Or even you can look at probability. If the probability changes, still choosing that shorter, more for sure stimulus and consequence. So why would organisms bother with choosing a smaller reinforcer when they know that a larger later option is available? This has to do to the principle of discounting, which is as the time or the probability or the response effort changes, specifically increases in time, increases in response effort, and decreases in probability, then the value of that reinforcer changes, and its strength on altering the operand changes well. That's been, seen in animal models where if you deliver larger later reinforcers, it does not have the same effect of shaping the behavior. The evolution discounting, a lot of it started with understanding just delay discounting. Would you rather some smaller amount of money now versus a larger amount of money later? Or like in the marshmallow experiment, would you rather one marshmallow now, or if you wait 2 minutes, you can get a second marshmallow, provided you don't eat the first one. That went on for a little bit, and then at the same time started developing probability discounting tasks, which is more so used in like the gambling side. And looking at that impulsivity, which was, would you take X amount of dollars at 100%, or some other lower, greater value at a much lower chance of getting it? Different things can affect how and when people engage in discounting. Things such as context. Some of the Dixon studies have looked at how responding to these surveys changes when in the presence of a casino versus when out of a casino. With being out of that impulsive context, discounting occurring at much lower rates, meaning responding was less impulsive, more waiting for those delayed reinforcers. Some technology for self-control, because self-control is really the thing that counters impulsivity. Looking back towards the 70s, Miller looked at behavioral contracts, which is just a written form of basically contingency specifying stimuli. You follow through with what you're supposed to be doing, you get the reward that you get at the end. Showing when things were put in writing, much greater follow through in terms of that self-control. Use of contingency managers, such as in studies by Dickerson and Creedon, which is just having someone to monitor your progress towards whatever goals that you set, and making sure that you follow through with it. So the one individual is mostly in charge of their behavior, but there is someone checking in to making sure that they're following through those contingencies. And then still with more recent studies, self-monitored schedule following. So rather than teach how to delay your responding or delay for that larger later reinforcer, teaching how to follow like a schedule that, by essence, when you follow all the steps of the schedule, you will then get the terminal reinforcer. I think in this study they did that with individuals with developmental delay, to kind of build that self-control skill. Teaching self-control itself, though, rather than just putting up environmental scaffolding to teach self-control. Dixon, actually in 2003, did a study to teach self-control. First, he presented smaller sooner reinforcers and a larger later reinforcer with the typical, you can get the larger later with a delay, or you can get the smaller amount now. An individual would choose the smaller sooner reinforcer. So then he flipped it. He presented now both the larger reinforcer and the smaller reinforcer at the same time. Individual now chose the larger reinforcer. So after that, a response requirement was put on to obtain the larger layer reinforcer, with gradually increasing time to obtain it and the response effort required. And the shaping allowed the individual to now choose the larger layer even as the delay increased and increased and increased, regardless of whether the smaller sooner reinforcer was available all the time. Some key findings in that study were that a distracting task was key. So some other tasks looked at just not engaging anything, you just had to wait. And obtaining that self-control is much more delayed, more variable than it was in the study. Maybe, Einstein's theory of relativity, just, when you're engaged in a task, time moves faster. Regardless, you put a task or a demand to fill the gap of time and gradually increase the time until they obtain a larger later, greater chance of them learning self-control. So now we've looked at discounting for money, edibles, larger reinforcers, but what about health? This is the purpose of my study. In terms of health discounting, the only thing that's really been done looking at discounting and health is how impulsivity is correlated with healthy choices, such as with a study by Bickel, looking at smokers versus non-smokers. Smokers engage or discount to a greater degree than non-smokers. In a study by Weller, obese women specifically discounted to a greater degree rather than obese men, but that study has some limitations. The income levels that were reported in the table, quite a bit of a gap. I'd like to see it a little bit more similar to really make that justification. But other than that, no real looking at what determines healthy choice, how people discount health choices, other than that cultural factors. There have been some studies with cultural factors that see the different cultures determine what's healthy or not differently. So why should we advance this technology? To control behavior, we must understand all the functionally relevant variables. Unlike money, with looking at temporal and probability discounting, money is a pretty well-known generalized condition reinforcer. You can use it to get whatever else you want. Money has value in almost all contexts, but health is determined by learning history and culture, family culture, the culture at whole, the place you live, access to healthy food choices, the amount of income you make, because that limits what kind of healthy food choices you can make. Response effort to go and get those. All these things can influence what an individual determines healthy or unhealthy. And there's also a bidirectionality to health. If you're too skinny, that's unhealthy. If you're way too obese, that's unhealthy. Weight in and of itself isn't quite a clear-cut indicator of health, because you can say a bodybuilder is pretty healthy, but they weigh quite a bit. Versus some supermodels you can argue are unhealthy even though they're at an ideal weight. So let's get on to learning how we advance this. So methods used in this study. It was one packet of 2 surveys. I was able to deliver to 11 participants out of the 30, or I got 11 back out of the 30 I provided them to. So for survey 1, it was a simple mirror of your regular temporal or probability discounting tasks, but rather than money, it was a would you rather eat a low-calorie food. It was food option A, and food option A was showed options such as a salad with no dressing, a plain chicken breast, or other foods that they would think fit in that category. So you can either eat a low-calorie food and lose some amount of pounds, eat it for a certain amount of days and lose a certain amount of pounds, or you eat a medium-calorie food and lose no weight for that same amount of time. And then survey 2 changes around a bit with one accidental mistake that I think leads to some interesting results. So it was to imagine you are 70 pounds heavier now, and the survey question changed to would you rather eat a medium calorie food and lose some amount of weight, or eat a low calorie food for a certain amount of days and lose 0 pounds. Now, I know it's confusing. Why would we look at eating medium calorie food and losing weight and have them imagine 70 pounds heavier? This is the mistake that happened in the survey. Didn't notice it till most data was collected, but I decided to run with it, see where the data would go because some interesting results happened. And I think that this mistake will actually lead to better future research, much like how when the operandum in one of Skinner's research boxes broke and we were able to discover the extinction burst. This could potentially lead to some similar future research. So our results are combined average AUC. I use area under the curve to calculate impulsivity. So the higher the proportion area under the curve, then that means the less impulsive they're responding, and vice versa for lower area under the curves. So it's this curve averaged, around 40% of the curve area was under the curve across all individuals. For survey 2, now you would think with having a medium calorie food and having it lose weight, medium calorie food is the impulsive responding, we should be at straight 0. Why would anyone want to choose low calorie food? Well, it's not the case. It averaged about 20% was the area under the curve for survey 2. Why would that happen? If we look at the table here, some of the key features to look at for this are that participants that were of a particularly low weight, so like participant 3, participant 10, they had complete impulsive responding for survey 1, meaning they would choose a medium calorie food and lose no weight. And then that completely flipped for survey 2, where now the low calorie food was causing no weight loss. Again, being at only 110 pounds and 95 pounds, if you were to lose an additional upwards to 60 pounds with some of the max values, that's almost like a fatal amount of weight loss for these adult women. So, of course, they're going to choose the low calorie responding if it means they're not going to lose any weight. Other participants, such as participant 8, had an interesting thing where they had complete non-impulsive responding for both surveys. So meaning that in survey 1, they chose low-calorie food and it was associated with weight loss. And then in survey 2, when no weight loss was associated with it, they still chose low-calorie food. This could potentially be just due to personal preference of those foods, not liking the medium-calorie foods, which is something, again, to look for in healthy food choice. If we can make those foods preferred, that could lead them to choosing those foods that will potentially promote longer health, better health effects. Other notable things were on, it's not shown in this table, but there's sort of a shortened horizon effect. Most people on this provided age, so I was able to graph age to a proportion AUC for survey 1, and as age increased, proportion AUC decreased. There was a study by Morgan in 2016 looking at religious priming and its effect on discounting, and they noticed a similar thing, so they called it the horizon effect, meaning that if there's a less amount of time perceived of living, you can't write out the whole duration for that discount, so you have to choose the more immediate outcome because you might potentially be dead by the time you get that larger later reinforcer. So again, main points of discussion, fatal weight loss if someone's way below the weight, alteration of contingency specifying stimuli caused complete flip in responding for most individuals who are responding normally. So that's another thing to look at too. I would like to see for future studies looking at providing an actual food choice and just saying, here, this is a healthy option, and seeing if they're like, okay, I'll take the healthier option just because someone told them so. Not more that rule governance, contingency specifying stimuli, because individuals chose low calorie, but once the survey told them that medium calorie foods now made them lose weight, they chose that knowing that very well it probably doesn't make sense in real life. Again, for some other future studies, I think splitting groups into age categories could help offset some of that short horizon effect, and compare responding between different age groups to see if that keeps results within groups more in line with what we'd expect, and not have the short horizon be the variable that affects impulsive responding. Tailoring studies to the individual rather than just a blanket response. Again, individuals who are of a lower weight, they wouldn't want to lose weight. They're already low. Why would they choose that? So tailoring to maybe having the survey start with what's your ideal weight, and then having all the responding change, like the titrations can change as proportion to that ideal weight, whether people want to gain weight or lose weight. That would be really helpful to make it more specific to the individual and their cultural learning history and factors that what they consider healthy, and maybe even comparing that to like the just federal regulations for what's considered healthy. And lastly, assessing the effects of contingency specifying stimuli and their effects on food choice. Just being told that, hey, this is healthy. We see that nowadays when things say low fat, even though they're saying they're low fat, they're uploaded with sugar, which is arguably worse for you. So things like that really affect responding and how we make healthy choices, and those are the variables we need to continue to look at if we're trying to advance the technology of health discounting. Again, my name is Richard Warszankowski. I'd like to thank members of the committee for watching my presentation, reading my thesis. Thank you to Dixon for just the journey I've been on through SIU. Hope you all enjoyed my thesis, and I thank you for all your feedback. Thank you, and goodbye.